The lecture hall was massive, with seats rising up in curved rows like the inside of a giant bowl. Students from 30 different worlds sat waiting, their bodies in dozens of shapes and sizes. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few glowed softly in the dim light. They all wore the same gray uniforms of the Galactic Military Academy, though the uniforms had been modified to fit each species. Commander Voss walked to the front of the room. He was a Thalen, tall and thin with smooth blue skin and 4 arms. 2 of his arms carried data tablets while the other 2 gestured as he spoke. His large black eyes swept across the room, counting the students. 347 cadets. It was always 347 in this class. The number meant something, though the new students did not know it yet. "Welcome to Military History 301, Voss said. His voice was deep and clear. "This course covers the major conflicts of the past 5 centuries. We will study strategy, tactics, and the decisions that changed the galaxy." A few students shifted in their seats. Most looked bored. They had all taken history classes before. They thought they knew what to expect. "But we will not start at the beginning," Voss continued. He pressed a button on his tablet. "We will start with the most important lesson first. Everything else you learn this semester will build on what you see today." The lights dimmed further. Behind Voss, a huge screen lit up. The students leaned forward to see. The image was old and grainy, the kind of photograph that came from primitive technology. It showed a young human girl, small and thin, wearing a military jacket that was far too big for her. The jacket hung past her hands and nearly reached her knees. Her dark hair was pulled back roughly. Her face was dirty with streaks of dust across her cheeks, but her eyes were clear and focused, staring directly at the camera. For a moment, the room was silent. Then someone laughed. It was a Dren student named Mira sitting in the 3rd row. She had 6 legs and a round body covered in short orange fur. "Is this a joke?" she asked, her translator turning her chittering sounds into Galactic Standard. "That's a child." Other students began to whisper and laugh with her. A human child in a military jacket? It had to be some kind of test, a trick question to see if they were paying attention. Commander Voss did not smile. He did not move. He simply stood still, watching the students laugh, waiting. An Earlian student named Torvik, who had rough gray skin like stone, stopped laughing first. His eyes went wide. "Wait," he said quietly. "Commander, that's not... Is that from Busan?" The laughter died instantly. Voss nodded once, slowly. "Yes, Cadet Torvik, this is from Busan." Every student in the room knew that name, Busan. It was taught in basic history across the entire galaxy, the battle that changed everything. The moment when humans proved they could not be conquered, could not be broken, no matter what the odds. "Her name was Gia," Voss said. "When this photograph was taken, she was 16 standard years old. By human measurement, she was still considered a child in her society." The screen changed. Now it showed a map of a planet. Earth, blue and green and beautiful, covered in clouds. 347 years ago, Voss said. Humanity experienced first contact. The Krill Empire arrived at Earth with superior weapons, faster ships, and complete confidence in their victory. They had conquered 42 other species. Humanity would be the 43rd. The map zoomed in, showing cities on Earth's surface. Then those cities began to disappear, replaced by red marks, destroyed, burning. The Krill expected humanity to surrender within 1 month, Voss continued. Humans had barely reached their own moon. They had no faster-than-light travel. They had no energy shields. Their weapons were primitive chemical explosives and basic lasers. Against the Krill fleet, they should have had no chance. The screen showed images of destruction now. Buildings collapsed into rubble, fires spreading across cities, crowds of humans running, trying to escape. But humans did not surrender, Voss said. They fought back with everything they had, and when their military forces were scattered and broken, their civilians picked up weapons and continued fighting. The image returned to Gia's photograph, the girl with the too large jacket and the steady eyes. This girl was not a soldier, Voss said. She had no training. She was a student before the invasion, studying literature and music. She had never held a weapon. She had never seen war. Mira, the Dren student who had laughed, now sat very still. Her orange fur had darkened with shame. Gia was separated from her family when Seoul was bombed, Voss explained. She fled south with thousands of other refugees. Many died on the journey. She survived. When she reached Busan, She found the last major human defense perimeter in East Asia. Soldiers were there, trying to hold the line against the Krill advance. Gia volunteered to help. The screen changed again, showing the city of Busan. It was surrounded by enemy forces marked in red on the map, a tiny blue dot in a sea of red. The commanding officer told her she was too young, Voss said. Too small. Too inexperienced. He told her to evacuate with the other civilians while there was still time. Some students nodded. That made sense. What could a child do in a war? Gia refused to leave, Voss continued. She told the officer that everyone who could help should help. That waiting to grow up was a luxury nobody had anymore, that the Krill did not care how old she was when they killed her, so age should not matter when she fought back. Voss let that sink in for a moment. The room was completely silent now. The officer let her stay, Voss said. He assigned her to communications work. Simple tasks, carrying messages between units when the electronic systems were jammed, helping coordinate evacuations. Nothing dangerous, he thought. Nothing that would put a child at risk. The commander's forearms moved, bringing up new images. Charts and graphs. Battle maps covered in arrows and symbols. But Gia was not simple, Voss said. And she was not just a child. She was a human. And humans, as the galaxy has learned, are dangerously good at pattern recognition. At seeing connections others miss. At finding solutions where none should exist. The screen now showed a complex web of red lines. Krill supply routes, positions, and attack patterns. After 3 months of siege, Gia noticed something, Voss said. Something that every trained military analyst had missed. She saw a pattern in how the Krill attacked. A weakness in their logistics. A flaw in their strategy. Voss turned to face his students directly. The Battle of Busan was the turning point of the war, he said. It was the moment humanity stopped retreating and started winning. It was the beginning of the Krill defeat and the start of Earth's rise as a galactic power, and it began with observations made by a 16-year-old girl in an oversized jacket. The commander paused, letting his words echo in the silent hall. This semester, Voss said, we will study how that happened. We will learn what Gia saw, what she planned, and what she sacrificed. We will understand why her picture hangs in every military academy in the known galaxy, and we will learn why you should never ever underestimate a human based on their appearance. The lights came back up slowly. Every student sat frozen, staring at the image of Gia on the screen. Tomorrow, Commander Voss said, we begin at the beginning. With first contact, and with how the Krill Empire made their first and fatal mistake. He dismissed the class. Students filed out slowly, quietly, still thinking about the girl in the photograph. Mira, the Dren who had laughed, stopped at the door. She looked back at the screen one last time, at Gia's steady gaze, and felt something she had never felt before in a history class. She felt humbled, and she wanted to know more. The ships appeared without warning on a Tuesday morning in March. They materialized in orbit around Earth, dozens of them, each one larger than the biggest building humanity had ever constructed. The news spread across the planet in minutes. Humanity was not alone in the universe. For 6 hours there was celebration. People gathered in streets and city squares, pointing at the sky, taking pictures. Scientists prepared welcome messages in dozens of languages. World leaders rushed to emergency meetings, arguing about who should speak first for the planet. Then the bombardment began. The Krill did not send warnings. They did not make demands. They simply started firing. Beams of superheated energy fell from the sky like rain, striking military bases first, then government buildings, then anything that looked important. In some cities, entire blocks vanished in seconds, turned to ash and melted stone. Gia was in school when it happened. She was sitting in history class, ironically, learning about ancient wars. The building shook. Windows shattered. The teacher screamed for everyone to get under their desks, as if desks could protect them from weapons that could slice through concrete like paper. The school's emergency systems activated. Alarms blared. Red lights flashed in every hallway. Gia and her classmates ran for the exits, following the evacuation routes they had practiced for fires and earthquakes, never imagining they would need them for an alien attack. Outside, the sky was burning. No, that was not quite right. The sky was not burning. The city was burning, and the smoke rose so thick it blocked out the sun. People ran in every direction, some carrying children, others carrying whatever belongings they had grabbed. Cars clogged the streets, going nowhere, honking uselessly. Jia looked for her parents. They worked on the other side of the city. The phones did not work. The internet was down. There was no way to reach them, no way to know if they were safe. Everyone south. A police officer was shouting, directing the crowds. Head south to the evacuation zones. Stay on the main roads. Jia joined the flow of people, letting the crowd carry her along. She kept looking back, hoping to see her parents running to catch up. They never appeared. The journey south took 3 days. People walked because the roads were blocked with abandoned cars. They slept in parks and empty buildings. They shared food and water when they had any. Jia traveled with a group of strangers who became friends through necessity. An old woman named Heywan who could barely walk. A businessman named Kyung-soo who gave his jacket to a shivering child. A teenager named Minji who knew which buildings were safe to sleep in. On the second day, they saw the krill for the first time. The aliens marched through the ruins of a town, searching for survivors. They were tall, taller than any human, with 4 legs and bodies covered in dark armor that seemed to grow from their skin. Their heads were elongated with clusters of glowing orange eyes. They moved fast, impossibly fast, and their weapons made a sound like thunder when they fired. The group hid in a collapsed building, barely breathing, watching the krill hunt through the rubble. The aliens found a family hiding in a basement. Jia heard the screams. She would hear those screams in her sleep for years afterward. When the krill finally moved on, the group ran. They ran until their legs burned and their lungs felt like fire. They ran until they could not run anymore. On the 3rd day, they reached Busan. The city had become a fortress. Soldiers had set up barriers at every entrance, checking everyone who came in, organizing refugees into camps. Thousands of people crowded into spaces meant for hundreds. There was not enough food, not enough water, not enough medicine, but there were walls and soldiers, and the hope of safety. Jia was separated from her traveling companions in the chaos. She found herself in a refugee center, a school gymnasium converted into a dormitory. Hundreds of people slept on the floor, shoulder to shoulder. Babies cried constantly. The elderly moaned in pain. Everyone wore the same expression of shock and loss. She stayed there for 2 days, waiting for news about her parents, about Seoul, about anything. But no news came. The krill had destroyed the satellites. Long-range communication was impossible. Every city was on its own. On the 3rd day in Busan, Jia could not stand it anymore. She left the gymnasium and walked toward the defense perimeter. She had heard soldiers talking about needing help, about not having enough people for all the work that needed doing. If she could not find her parents, if she could not go home, at least she could do something useful. The command post was set up in what had been a hotel. Now the windows were sandbagged and the lobby was full of radios and maps and exhausted soldiers. Jia walked up to the first soldier she saw, a sergeant with a scarred face and tired eyes. His name tag said Taewon. "I want to help," Jia said. Taewon looked at her, really looked at her, taking in her age, her size, her civilian clothes covered in dust from the journey. "How old are you, kid?" 16. "Go back to the refugee center," Taewon said, not unkindly. "This is not a place for children." "There are no places for children anymore," Jia replied. "The krill don't care how old I am. They killed people in my school. They killed people on the road. If I'm old enough to die, I'm old enough to help." Taewon was quiet for a moment. He had heard this speech before, or versions of it from dozens of other civilians. The war had made everyone older than their years. "Can you shoot a gun?" he asked. "No." "Can you drive?" "No." "Can you use a radio? Read a map? Treat wounds?" "I can learn," Jia said. "I'm smart. I learn fast. And I won't give up." Something in her voice must have convinced him, or maybe he was just too tired to argue. Taewon sighed and called over another soldier, a medic named Hyun-woo who looked almost as young as Jia. "Show her the communication setup," Taewon said. "If she can handle messages between units, we can use her. But if she gets scared or causes problems, she goes back to the refugee center. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Hyun-woo said. Jia followed Hyun-woo to a room full of radios and computers. Most of the equipment was damaged or barely working. The krill jamming signals disrupted everything electronic. Messages had to be sent manually, carried by runners from one unit to another. "It's simple," Hyun-woo explained. "Officers give you a message. You memorize it. You run to the destination and deliver it word for word. No changing anything. No adding your opinions. Just repeat what you were told. That's it? Jia asked. That's it, Hyunwoo confirmed. But you have to be fast. And you have to be accurate. A wrong message could get people killed. Jia nodded. She could do this. She would do this. For the next week, she ran messages all over the defense perimeter, from the command post to the artillery positions, from the medical tents to the forward observation posts. She learned the layout of the defenses. She learned which units were where. She learned the names of the officers and what they were responsible for. She also learned how desperate the situation was. The Krill were closing in from 3 sides. Human forces were low on ammunition, low on fuel, low on everything. Every day the perimeter shrank a little more. Every day more soldiers died, but humans kept fighting. They fought with guns until the bullets ran out, then with grenades, then with knives and rocks and bare hands. They set traps in the ruins. They ambushed Krill patrols. They refused to surrender. Jia watched and learned. She saw how the officers planned their defenses. She saw how soldiers adapted to each new Krill tactic. She saw the patterns in how the enemy attacked, the times they preferred, the routes they used. And slowly, an idea began to form in her mind. The Krill were predictable. They followed patterns. They had routines. That meant they had weaknesses. She just had to figure out what those weaknesses were. 2 months after arriving in Busan, Jia was no longer just a message runner. Taewon had promoted her to communications coordinator, managing the schedule of all the runners. She had access to all the battle reports. She saw every update from every unit, and she saw the pattern nobody else had noticed yet. One night, unable to sleep, Jia sat in the communications room with a stolen map and a pencil. She marked every Krill attack for the past 30 days, every movement, every supply convoy. She drew lines connecting them, looking for the pattern she knew was there, and then she saw it. The Krill were not random. They were efficient. All their forces in the region were supplied by a single command nexus, located 70 kilometers behind their lines. Every attack originated from there. Every supply convoy came from there. It was the hub of their entire operation. If that nexus was destroyed, the Krill in this region would be cut off. Confused, vulnerable. Jia stared at the map, her heart pounding. She had found it. She had found the weakness. Now she just had to convince someone to listen to her. The morning Jia decided to present her findings, artillery fire woke the city before dawn. The Krill were testing the western defenses again, probing for weak spots. Explosions echoed across Busan like distant thunder. Nobody even flinched anymore. The sounds of war had become normal. Jia found Sergeant Taewon in the command post, hunched over a table covered in maps and reports. He had not slept in 2 days. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his uniform was stained with dirt and dried blood. Around him, other officers shouted into radios, trying to coordinate the defense against the morning assault. "Sergeant," Jia said quietly, "I need to show you something." Taewon did not look up. "Not now, Jia, we're busy. It's important. Everything is important right now. Come back later." Jia stood her ground. She had spent 3 months in this war. She had earned the right to be heard. "I found a pattern in the Krill attacks, a weakness in their supply system. That got his attention." Taewon looked up, studying her face. "What kind of pattern?" She spread her map on the table, pushing aside other documents. The officers nearby glanced over, annoyed at the interruption, but Jia ignored them. She pointed to the marks she had made, the lines she had drawn connecting dozens of data points. "Every Krill unit in this region gets supplies from the same source," she explained. "Here, 70 kilometers northwest. They're using an old industrial complex as their command nexus. All their coordination comes from there. All their supplies, everything." Taewon studied the map. "How do you know this?" "I've been tracking their movements for 2 months. Every supply convoy, every troop deployment, they all originate from this location. And look at the timing." She pointed to notes she had written in the margins. "They resupply every 4 days, always at night. The convoys follow the same routes. They're efficient, but that makes them predictable." Another officer, a major named Dong Hyun, leaned over to look. He was older, with gray hair and the bearing of a career soldier. "This is interesting analysis," he admitted. "But even if you're right, what can we do? We barely have enough troops to hold the perimeter. We can't spare anyone for a raid 70 kilometers behind enemy lines. We don't need many, Gia said. She had thought about this all night. A small team could infiltrate, destroy the Nexus. Without their command structure, the Krill forces here would be disorganized, confused. We could break the siege. A small team couldn't get through 70 kilometers of enemy territory, Taewon said. It's suicide. It's a chance, Gia countered. Right now we're just waiting to lose. Every day the Krill get closer. Every day we have fewer soldiers and less ammunition. If we don't try something different, we'll fall within a month. The truth of her words hung in the air. Everyone in the room knew she was right. Busan was dying slowly. The only question was how long they could hold out. Major Dong-hyun was quiet for a long moment, studying the map. Finally, he spoke. How confident are you in this analysis? Chia met his eyes. Very confident, sir. You're 16 years old. You have no formal military training. You're asking me to risk soldiers' lives on the observations of a civilian child. I'm asking you to risk soldiers' lives on accurate intelligence, Gia said firmly. My age doesn't change the facts. The Nexus is there. The pattern is real. You can verify it yourself if you want. Dong-hyun looked at Taewon. What do you think, Sergeant? You've worked with her. Taewon rubbed his face, exhausted. She's smart, observant, she sees things other people miss. But this is a big risk. Everything is a big risk now, Dong-hyun said. He picked up a radio. Get me reconnaissance. I want drone footage of this location, whatever we can get. 2 hours later, the reconnaissance came back. A damaged surveillance drone had managed to capture images of the industrial complex Gia had identified. The photos were blurry and incomplete, but they showed exactly what she had predicted. Krill vehicles, supply depots, heavy fortifications, and a massive communication array broadcasting signals across the entire region. Dong-hyun called an emergency meeting of all senior officers. Gia was summoned to brief them, the first time a civilian had ever been invited to a command meeting. She stood in front of 20 battle-hardened soldiers and explained her findings again, pointing to maps and data, answering questions with a confidence that surprised even herself. When she finished, the room erupted in debate. Some officers thought it was brilliant. Others thought it was madness. They argued about feasibility, timing, resources. They argued about whether they could afford to try and whether they could afford not to. Finally, Dong-hyun raised his hand for silence. We'll do it, one team. 12 soldiers. Their mission is to infiltrate to the Nexus and destroy it. We hit them in 4 days during their next resupply window when security will be lighter. Who leads the team? Someone asked. I do, Taewon said immediately. I know this type of operation, and I'll need technical support who understands their communication systems. He looked at Gia. She knew what he was going to say before he said it. No, Taewon said firmly. You're not going. I have to go, Gia replied. I'm the only one who has studied their patterns this closely. I know their schedules, their routes. And if we get inside the Nexus, someone needs to understand their systems well enough to sabotage them properly. You're a child. I'm the person who found this weakness. I should be part of exploiting it. Absolutely not, they stared at each other. The room was silent, watching this confrontation between a grizzled sergeant and a teenage girl. Major Dong-hyun interrupted. She has a point, Taewon. She knows the intelligence better than anyone, and we need someone who can interface with Krill technology. Then I'll bring an engineer, Taewon said. Someone trained. Our engineers are needed here keeping our own systems running, Dong-hyun said. We can't spare them, but we can spare a communications coordinator who has proven herself capable. Taewon's jaw tightened. Sir, with respect, it's her choice, Dong-hyun said. He looked at Gia. You understand what this means? The odds of survival are low, very low. If you're captured, the Krill won't care how old you are. And if things go wrong, we can't send a rescue team. You'll be on your own. Gia had already accepted these facts. I understand, sir. Why? Taewon asked quietly. Why volunteer for this? You could stay here. Stay safe. Gia thought about her parents missing somewhere in the ruins of Seoul. She thought about her classmates who had died in the first bombardment. She thought about the family she had seen killed by Krill soldiers on the road to Busan. Because someone has to, she said simply. And I can help. So I should. Taewon closed his eyes, defeated. Fine, but you follow my orders exactly. No heroics. No improvising. You do what I say when I say it, agreed? Agreed. The team was assembled over the next 2 days. 12 people, including Jia and Taiwan. There was Hyunwoo, the medic who had trained her in the beginning. A pilot named Sang-mi who knew how to fly captured krill vehicles. A scout named Bo-ra who could move silently through any terrain. A heavy weapons specialist named Woo Jin who carried more ammunition than seemed possible. And 6 others, each chosen for specific skills. They prepared in secret away from the main base. They studied maps and practiced moving as a unit. They tested equipment and planned routes. Jia memorized every detail of the industrial complex layout, every entry point, every potential obstacle. At night, lying in her bunk, she felt fear for the first time since arriving in Busan. Not fear of the krill, but fear of failing. Fear of getting these soldiers killed. Fear that she had been wrong about the pattern, that her analysis was flawed, that this mission would fail because she had convinced them to try. Hyunwoo found her one night sitting outside staring at the stars. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Thinking too much," Jia admitted. "About the mission? About whether I'm right. Whether this is worth 12 lives." Hyunwoo sat beside her. "You know what I think? I think you're braver than most soldiers I've met. You didn't have to be here. You could have stayed in the refugee center, hidden, hoped someone else would save you. But you chose to fight. That takes courage. Or stupidity." "Sometimes they're the same thing," Hyunwoo said with a slight smile. "But I'd rather die trying than die waiting. I think most of us feel that way." On the 4th night, under cover of darkness, the team moved out. They left through a hidden exit in the southern perimeter, slipping past krill patrols heading into enemy territory. Jia took one last look at Busan, at the lights of the city she had helped defend. Then she turned and followed Taiwan into the darkness, carrying nothing but a pack of supplies, a stolen krill communications device, and the hope that her plan would work. Behind them, the artillery started firing again, keeping the krill distracted. Ahead of them, 70 kilometers of enemy territory waited. The first night was the easiest. The team moved through abandoned suburbs, staying low, avoiding main roads. The krill had already swept through these areas, taking anything useful and leaving behind only ruins. Empty buildings made good hiding places. No patrols came this close to the front lines. By dawn, they had covered 12 kilometers. They hid in a collapsed shopping center, taking turns sleeping while others kept watch. Jia could not sleep. Every sound made her tense, expecting krill soldiers to appear. But nothing happened. The day passed slowly, hot and silent. The second night was harder. They entered a zone with active krill patrols. Bo-ra, the scout, led them through back alleys and drainage tunnels, moving in absolute silence. Once they had to freeze for 20 minutes while a krill patrol passed within 10 meters. Jia pressed herself against a wall, barely breathing, watching the alien soldiers march past with their glowing orange eyes scanning the darkness. When the patrol finally moved on, Taiwan signaled them forward. They continued more cautiously now. On the 3rd day, they lost their first person. A soldier named Il-sung stepped on a hidden sensor while crossing an open field. The sensor triggered an automated defense system. Guns emerged from concealed positions and fired before anyone could react. Il-sung died instantly. The rest of the team ran for cover as bullets tore through the grass around them. They made it to a cluster of trees, all of them shaken. Taiwan did a quick head count. 11 left. They could not even recover Il-sung's body without triggering more defenses. They had to leave him there. "Keep moving," Taiwan said quietly. His voice was hard, but Jia saw the pain in his eyes. "We can mourn later." The 4th day brought rain. Cold, heavy rain that soaked through their clothes and made every step miserable, but it also provided cover, reducing visibility and masking their movements. They made good progress, covering nearly 20 kilometers. That night they entered the ruins of Daegu, a city that had been home to 2 million people before the invasion. Now it was a graveyard. Buildings stood empty, windows shattered, streets littered with debris. The krill had turned parts of it into a staging area, with supply depots and barracks scattered throughout. Bo-ra led them through the quietest sections, avoiding any areas with lights or activity. They moved like ghosts, silent and invisible. On the 5th day, disaster struck. They were crossing through what had been a park when a krill sensor drone appeared overhead. It was small, only the size of a basketball, but its sensors were powerful. It swept the area with scanning beams, searching for movement. "Don't move," Taiwan whispered. "They detect motion, not body heat." Everyone froze. Jia stood perfectly still, barely breathing as the drone hovered above them. Its scanning beams passed over her once, twice. She felt like screaming, like running, but she forced herself to remain motionless. The drone started to move away. They were safe. Then Hyunwoo's foot slipped on wet grass. It was a tiny movement, barely noticeable. But the drone detected it immediately. It spun around, focusing its sensors on their position. An alarm began to sound. "Run!" Taewon shouted. They ran. The drone followed, broadcasting their location. In the distance, Jia heard the sound of Krill vehicles starting up, coming to investigate. Bo-ra and Woo-jin turned to provide covering fire, shooting at the drone. Their bullets hit it, damaging its systems, but it continued transmitting even as it fell from the sky. This way, Sang-mi, the pilot, led them toward a collapsed building. They scrambled through a broken window and down into a basement, pulling debris over the entrance behind them. They could hear Krill soldiers arriving above, searching the area. They huddled in the darkness, weapons ready. If the Krill found them, this would be their last stand. Hours passed. The sounds of searching continued. Then slowly the Krill moved away. They had not found the hiding place, but Bo-ra had been hit during the escape. A Krill energy weapon had grazed her shoulder, burning through her armor and into flesh. The wound was deep and bleeding badly. Hyunwoo worked on her by flashlight, his hands steady despite the danger they were in. He cleaned the wound and injected her with what little medicine they had left. "She needs real treatment," he whispered to Taewon. "Antibiotics, surgery, I've done what I can, but..." "She'll make it," Bo-ra said through gritted teeth. "I'm not dying in this basement." They waited until night to move again. Bo-ra could barely walk, leaning heavily on Woo-jin for support. Their progress slowed to a crawl. On the 6th day, they reached the outer perimeter of the industrial complex. Jia's analysis had been correct. The facility was massive, covering several square kilometers. Krill vehicles moved in and out constantly. Guard towers dotted the walls. Automated defenses covered every approach. Taewon studied the complex through binoculars. "This is more heavily defended than the reconnaissance showed." "Intelligence is always incomplete," said one of the soldiers, a woman named Youngja. "Can we still do this?" Another soldier asked. Taewon looked at Jia. "You're the expert. What do you think?" Jia studied the complex, comparing it to the mental map she had built from weeks of data. "The resupply convoy is due tonight. When the gates open to let them in, there will be a brief window. Maybe 2 minutes when security is focused on processing the convoy. That's our chance." 2 minutes to get inside a facility that size? Woo-jin shook his head. "That's tight." "It's all we have," Jia said. They spent the day preparing, resting, checking equipment. Everyone knew the odds. Getting inside was nearly impossible. Getting out would be even harder, but nobody suggested turning back. As night fell, they moved into position near the main gate. The resupply convoy arrived exactly when Jia predicted, a line of heavy vehicles carrying weapons and supplies. The gates opened. Guards moved forward to check the convoy. "Now," Taewon whispered. They moved fast, using the convoy as cover, staying in the shadows. The guards were focused on the vehicles, following procedures, not expecting infiltrators. The team slipped through the gate and scattered, diving behind cover inside the complex. They were in. Sang-mi led them through the facility, following maintenance corridors and service passages. She had studied the layout for days and knew exactly where they needed to go. The command center was in the central building, protected by the most security. They encountered 2 Krill guards near a service entrance. Woo-jin took them down silently with a knife. They dragged the bodies into a closet and kept moving. Finally, they reached the command center. It was a massive room filled with alien technology, screens displaying tactical data, communication arrays broadcasting to Krill forces across the entire region. This was the heart of the enemy operation. "Plant the charges," Taewon ordered. The team spread out, placing explosives at key points. They worked quickly, efficiently, knowing every second counted. Jia moved to the main communication array. This was her job. She pulled out the stolen Krill device and connected it to their systems. Her fingers flew over the alien controls. She had studied these systems for months, learning their patterns, their logic. The device activated. Data flowed across screens. Jia began downloading everything, every bit of intelligence she could grab. Troop positions, supply routes, command codes. Everything that could help the human forces in Busan. "Charges set," Woo-jin reported. 2 minutes to detonation. I need more time, Gia said, still working. I'm uploading coordinates to our forces. This is everything they need to break the siege. We don't have more time, Taiwan said. We need to evacuate now. 30 more seconds, Gia said. The upload was almost complete. Almost alarms started blaring. They had been discovered. Go! Taiwan shouted to his team. Get out now. The soldiers ran for the exits. Taiwan grabbed Gia's arm. Leave it. We have to move. 5 seconds. Gia watched the progress bar. 80%. 90% complete. She yanked the device free and ran, following Taiwan through the corridors. Behind them, she could hear Krill soldiers responding to the alarm, rushing toward the command center. They burst out of the building and ran for the perimeter wall. Explosions erupted behind them as the charges detonated. The entire command center erupted in flames, the communication array collapsing, taking down the building with it. The team scrambled over the wall, using ropes in sheer desperation. Krill soldiers fired at them. Youngjia was hit and fell. So was another soldier named Dae-jung. They kept falling as the survivors ran into the darkness beyond the facility. Gia ran until her lungs burned, until her legs felt like they would collapse. She ran until the explosions behind them faded into the distance. When they finally stopped to rest, Taiwan counted heads again. 5 left, only 5 out of 12. Bora had died during the escape, her wounds too severe. Youngjia and Dae-jung were gone. 4 others had not made it out of the facility, but they had succeeded. The command nexus was destroyed, and Gia clutched the device with all the stolen intelligence, the information that could change everything. They still had to get back to Busan. 70 kilometers through enemy territory, with only 5 people and limited supplies. But they had done the impossible part. The rest was just survival. The journey back took 3 days. 3 days of moving only at night, hiding during the day, avoiding Krill patrols that seemed increasingly confused and disorganized. The destruction of the command nexus had worked exactly as Gia predicted. Without coordination from their central hub, the Krill forces were operating blindly, unable to communicate effectively or coordinate their movements. The 5 survivors moved through the chaos like ghosts. Taiwan, Gia, Hyunwoo, Sangmi, and Woojin, all of them were exhausted, injured, running on nothing but determination and the knowledge that the intelligence they carried could save thousands of lives. On the second day, they ran into a Krill patrol. But the patrol was confused, searching in the wrong direction, operating on outdated orders. The team hid in plain sight behind a wall while the Krill soldiers walked past, arguing among themselves in their clicking language. When Busan finally came into view on the 3rd night, Gia felt tears in her eyes. They had made it. Against impossible odds, they had made it back. The guards at the perimeter almost shot them before recognizing Taiwan. They were rushed to the command post where Major Dong-hyun was waiting. His face showed relief and grief in equal measure. Relief that some had returned. Grief for those who had not. Report, he said simply. Mission successful, sir, Taiwan replied. The nexus is destroyed. And we have something better. Gia stepped forward, holding out the stolen device. Complete intelligence on all Krill positions in the region. Troop numbers, supply routes, command codes, everything. Dong-hyun took the device with shaking hands. He immediately called for the intelligence officers. Within an hour, the data had been downloaded and analyzed. Within 2 hours, new orders were being issued to every human unit. The counteroffensive began at dawn. Using the intelligence Gia had stolen, human forces struck at every weak point in the Krill line simultaneously. Artillery hit supply depots with perfect accuracy. Infantry ambushed confused patrols. Pilots bombed staging areas. The Krill, still trying to reorganize after losing their command center, could not respond effectively. Within a week, the siege of Busan was broken. The Krill retreated north, losing vehicles and soldiers as they fled. Human forces pursued them, pushing them back, reclaiming territory kilometer by kilometer. Gia watched from the command post as reports flooded in. Victories. Small ones at first, then larger. Cities being retaken, refugees returning home. The tide of the war was turning. You did this, Hyunwoo said, standing beside her. You found the weakness. You planned the mission. You got the intelligence. This is because of you. Gia shook her head. It's because of everyone. the soldiers who came with us, the ones who didn't come back, the forces here who kept fighting, all of us together. But word spread quickly. The story of the girl who broke the siege, the civilian who saw what trained analysts had missed, the teenager who volunteered for a suicide mission and survived. Within days, every soldier in Busan knew her name. Within weeks, every human resistance fighter on Earth knew the story. Jia tried to return to normal work, but nothing was normal anymore. Officers asked her opinion on strategy. Soldiers treated her with respect usually reserved for decorated veterans. She had become a symbol without meaning to, a representation of human resilience and determination. The war continued for 2 more years. The Krill, having lost momentum, found themselves fighting an enemy that would not quit. Humans learned from captured technology. They built better weapons. They developed new tactics. Slowly, impossibly, they began to win. Jia stayed in the military throughout those 2 years. She trained others in intelligence analysis. She led more missions, though none as dangerous as the raid on the Nexus. She grew older, but never grew accustomed to war. Every loss hurt. Every victory came at a cost. When the Krill finally retreated from Earth, signing a ceasefire agreement, Jia was 18 years old. She had spent 2 years of her life fighting. She had seen friends die. She had killed enemy soldiers. She had done things no teenager should ever have to do. But humanity had survived. And in surviving, they had earned the respect of the galaxy. In the decades that followed, Earth became a major power. Humans reverse-engineered Krill technology, developing their own faster-than-light ships. They joined the galactic community not as victims, but as equals. The Krill Empire, humbled by their defeat, never attempted conquest again. Jia lived a long life. She never had children of her own, but she trained thousands of soldiers and intelligence officers. She helped write the Busan Accords, the treaties that prohibited targeting civilian populations during warfare. Her tactics were studied in military academies across dozens of worlds. She rarely talked about the war. When asked about her experiences, she would say only, "I did what needed to be done. Many others did more." But the galaxy never forgot. Her story became legend. The girl who was too young to fight, who fought anyway. The civilian who saw what experts missed. The teenager who changed the course of history. Commander Voss finished his lecture and stood silently for a moment. The lights in the lecture hall came up slowly. On the screen behind him was a final image. Jia, at age 84, shortly before her death, standing in front of a monument. The monument bore the names of all those who had died defending Busan, including the 7 members of her team who never came home. Jia lived to see humanity become one of the most respected species in the galaxy, Voss said. She saw the technologies developed from that war used to save lives rather than take them. She helped establish the laws that prevent what happened to Earth from happening to other worlds. He gestured to the screen. But when she was asked what she was most proud of, do you know what she said? The room was silent, waiting. She said she was proud that she had tried, not that she had succeeded, not that she had become famous, simply that when the moment came, she had chosen to act rather than hide. She was proud that she had done her small part, even though it felt insignificant at the time. Voss walked slowly to the front of the lecture hall. That is the lesson I want you to learn. Not tactics, not strategy. Those are important, but they are not the core lesson. He looked at each cadet, his 4 eyes moving from face to face. The lesson is this. Courage is not about being the strongest or the fastest or the best trained. Courage is about doing what needs to be done even when you are afraid. Even when success seems impossible. Even when everyone tells you that you are too young, too weak, too inexperienced. Cadet Mira, the Dren student who had laughed at the beginning of class, raised one of her 6 legs hesitantly. "Commander, may I ask a question?" "Of course. You said there are 347 students in this class, and the war ended 347 years ago. Is that deliberate?" Voss nodded. "Yes, 1 student for each year we have had peace. Because peace must be maintained by each new generation. Every student who passes through this class carries forward the responsibility to remember what Jia and others like her sacrificed." Another student, an Erlian named Torvik, asked, "What happened to the others? The ones who survived the mission with her?" Sergeant Taewon continued serving for 30 years. He trained new officers and never stopped talking about the bravest soldier he ever knew, a 16-year-old girl who refused to give up. Hyunwoo became a doctor. treating both humans and aliens. Sangmi helped design the first human faster-than-light ships. Wu Jin wrote a book about the war that is still required reading in many schools. Voss paused. And Taewon had a daughter. And that daughter had a daughter. And that family has produced soldiers for 4 generations now. He pressed a button on his tablet. A new image appeared on the screen. A young human woman in the gray uniform of the Galactic Military Academy. I would like you all to meet Corporal Yu Jin, Voss said. She is a student in the Advanced Tactics program, and she is the great-granddaughter of Sergeant Taewon. A ripple of surprise went through the lecture hall. Several students turned to look for the human cadet, who was sitting quietly in the back row. Yu Jin stood slowly. She was young, perhaps 20 standard years old, with the same steady eyes that Jia had shown in that first photograph. Corporal, Voss said, would you like to add anything? Yu Jin was quiet for a moment, then spoke. Her voice was clear and strong. My great-grandfather told me many stories about the war, but his favorite was always about Jia. He said she taught him that leadership is not about rank or age. It is about seeing what needs to be done and having the courage to do it. She looked around at her fellow students. He also said that Jia would hate being called a hero. She would say that heroes are people who do extraordinary things, but what she did was simply refuse to accept defeat. And that is something any of us can do, no matter our species, no matter our background. Yu Jin sat down. The lecture hall was completely silent. Voss let the moment settle, then spoke one final time. Your assignment for next class is to analyze Jia's strategy from a tactical perspective. Identify what worked and why. Consider how her approach might be applied to modern warfare. But more importantly, think about this question. What would you do if you were in her position? Would you have the courage to step forward when everyone expected you to hide? He dismissed the class. Students filed out slowly, talking quietly among themselves.